Our cover story is about China's new Great Wall, the Great Wall of Debt. A wall that has left the Chinese authorities banging their heads against it. Let's directly get to the numbers. According to a new Forbes report, China's overall debt, both in the public and the private sector, has risen to a colossal $51.9 trillion. I repeat, $51.9 trillion. That is almost 3 times the size of China's economy. And this number is truly staggering. If analysts are to be believed, matters are set to get even worse. They say that next year, that is 2024, China is set to sink further into debt. In fact, they predict a rise of 4 trillion yuan, that's equivalent to $570 billion. Just for the sake of perspective here, this debt far exceeds America's burden. As of December 2022, America's overall debt was around $31.4 trillion. China's relative debt burden is at least 40% higher than this. And if this doesn't highlight the precarious situation that China is in, then perhaps it's worth considering this report. It says due to the massive debt distress, Chinese cities are struggling to pay their bills. They are slashing wages, cutting public services, and reducing the fuel subsidies. Where exactly are these cities located? Mainly in these provinces: Heilongjiang, Hebei, Guangdong, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Hunan. All of these provinces are struggling with mountains of debt. And the road to recovery is not visible, by the way. Let me begin with Hebei, a province that's located in northern China. Throughout the last 3 months of 2022, the people of Hebei had trouble heating their homes because of a shortage of natural gas. And why was there a shortage? Because of the lack of government subsidies. And why were the subsidies lacking? Because the authorities did not have enough money. Most of their financial resources got drained paying debts. And let me remind you, this is all according to China's own media houses, not the Western press. And next, we have Heilongjiang province, the northernmost province in China. Throughout the bitter month of January, households in the city of Gambhir were also left without heating services because local firms had severely restricted the supply. And why did they restrict the supply? Again, no subsidies. And then we have Hunan and Guangdong provinces. In December last year, a number of cities in these provinces had to partially suspend the bus services. Why? Due to the budget constraints. And next, we have Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces. Last year, they had to cut down public sector jobs or reduce the salaries, jobs that are considered to be the most secure in the country. The Chinese state media said these provinces slashed pay in the public sector jobs by as much as 30%. And finally, we have Hegang, a city in Heilongjiang. It made history in mid-2022 by becoming the first city to undergo a fiscal restructuring. And why did it have to undergo this restructuring? Due to a grave debt distress. That's according to the state media. And there are many more accounts, but you get the point here. A debt storm is tearing apart Chinese cities. It is a storm that has sparked socio-economic tensions and unrest. Tensions like the rare protests that we saw in 2022. They could make a comeback this year, as the Chinese citizens struggle with lower wages, vanishing jobs, and shut businesses. The question is, what explains all of this? There are a host of reasons. Let's look at them one by one. Reason number one being exhausted budgets. Many local governments in China have completely drained their coffers by spending enormously on the lockdowns, mass testing, quarantine centers. This is a minefield of China's own making. Reason number two, lower revenue. As the Wuhan virus engulfed China last year, people reduced their spending to save money, and this resulted in less tax revenues by the local governments. Furthermore, huge tax breaks were given to support the ailing businesses. And reason number 3, the most important of them all, is the housing market slump. You see, home prices in China have been falling for 16 months straight. Land sales, which account for 40% of all the local government revenue, have also collapsed. I have a report with me. It's from last week. It says the sales of new residential properties in the country tumbled around 28% last year. That's a 5-year low. This graph tells you how. In 2018, the sales of new residential homes in China amounted to 12.6 trillion yuan. In 2019, this figure jumped to 13.9 trillion yuan. 15.45 trillion yuan in 2020. 16.2 trillion yuan in 2021. And in 2022, it fell to an abysmal 11.6 trillion yuan. And what does this tell you? That China's property bubble has burst. Its mighty real estate sector is crashing. For the unversed, this sector accounts for around 29% of the Chinese GDP. 29%. It accounts for a quarter of the domestic output, almost 80% of the household assets. Around 100,000 companies operate in this sector. And this makes it the nation's second biggest employer, providing around 27 million jobs to the Chinese citizens. And all of this is now under threat, courtesy the whims of one man, Xi Jinping. Last year, he rolled out a host of measures to reduce excessive borrowing by the property companies. In other words, he tried limiting the debt to the developers. But when this debt was limited, many found it impossible to complete the projects, and this set off a chain of events that triggered the real estate crash. And this same chain of events has now burdened the local governments with debt. The question is, what is China doing about this? And the answer is nothing much. The leaders sitting in Beijing have said they will not come to the rescue, that they will not bail the local governments out. Their message to them is simple. It's your baby, you should hold it yourself. And this is exactly what China's Ministry of Finance said earlier this month. The Chinese governments, of course, don't have to face elections. It is a one-party dictatorship which cannot be overthrown by legal or constitutional measures. But for how long can the government shut down public anger with an authoritarian plug? For how long can it ignore the growing debt problem? For how long can it leave the local governments to fend for themselves? The Chinese citizens have started raising these questions with unpredictable consequences. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.